Hi guys, as a new year is approaching, I just wanted to thank you for helping me get to 493 subscribers, and to celebrate, here are some creepy and disturbing true horror stories. This isn't nearly as scary as most of the stories on here, but something sticks out to me that happened when I was 15. I couldn't drive yet, so it was pretty common in our group of friends to walk everywhere or walk to each other's houses when our parents weren't home to drive us. I lived in a very safe suburb, so it wasn't weird for me to walk around listening to my iPod. I had just bought a cute new dress that was a little more low-cut than I was used to, and I was already self-conscious about wearing it. I was walking to my best friend's house on the left side of the street, where cars were going towards me and I wouldn't get creeped up on from behind. An old beat-up white van, of course, right? Comes up on the other side of the street, the window rolls down, and the guy driving yells something in my direction. I took out my headphones and he mumbled something about asking directions to a park. It sounded like he didn't even know the name of the park, and thinking back, he probably mumbled because he didn't know the name of any parks nearby. Something was very sketchy about this guy. He didn't look friendly. He had this creepy smile the entire time, and I could tell that he was looking at the cleavage on my dress, which probably made me the most uncomfortable. I tell him I have no idea what he's talking about or how to get there and keep walking. He drives forward, and a couple seconds later, the worst-case scenario in my head is coming true. He makes a U-turn at the stop sign a block ahead of us, so that he would be on the same side of the street as me. I felt like I had no escape, and I only had about 15 seconds until the car would be close again. I was still about pretty far away from my friend's house and couldn't go there, so I frantically looked around for some place to hide. I see a pretty thick bush in someone's front yard, and I realize that it's my only option. Now, I am terrified of spiders and will freak out if a strand of a spider web barely touches me. But I dove into that spider web infested bush like it was a fucking swimming pool and curled up with probably an entire colony of insects. But I didn't have time to worry about bugs. I laid as still as possible, and through some of the leaves I could see the car park in front of where I was before. I hear the car door open and shut, then I see feet underneath the car. I laid as still as possible, holding my breath and hoping that I didn't have something showing to give away my hiding spot. The man only walked around for a bit, probably to try and see where I ran off to, and when he couldn't see me out in the open, he drove away. I stayed in the bush for another 5 minutes until I was sure he was gone for good, then got up and walked to my friend's house. I got over how scared I was surprisingly quickly, I told my friend when I got to her house, but didn't really tell anyone else after because it didn't seem like a big deal at the time. I get chills thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't found that bush, or had hesitated because of all the spider webs on it. When I was 12, me and a group of my friends would play hide and seek in these woods that were on the edge of our neighborhood. We would always play around 6, but had to be back home by 10:30 at the latest on a weekend, and we weren't allowed to go so far that we couldn't see our houses. Those were the only rules our parents had for us. Well, one Friday we were out playing in the woods as usual, and I, for whatever reason, decided to go deeper in the woods. I can't remember how far I went into those woods, but what I do remember is coming across an old shack. I considered using it as a hiding place, but then I thought that they wouldn't come this deep into the woods to look for me, so I decided to head back. However, when I started to head back, I turned my head to look at the shack one last time, and for a split second I saw someone peeking out the door. Whoever it was quickly turned their head back when they saw me. I didn't pay too much attention to it and headed back. About halfway through my walk I hear, "Psst, hey kid, come over here." I looked back and saw an old man hiding behind a tree, gesturing me to come to him. I knew better and took off running. While I was running, I heard him yelling, "Wait!" and I could also hear the sounds of his footsteps running after me. When I got to the end of the woods, I ran into my friends who were wondering where I was. I told them to get out of the woods, and we ran to our friend's house. I told them what happened, and eventually I told my mom what happened too. Our parents called the police to search the woods for the old man, but I don't know if they found him or not. Our parents never let us play in those woods ever again after that, but even if they had, I would never go back. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite, but all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street on my side was the silhouette of a man dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky, and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still, until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back, and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved, until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time, staring at him. And then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated, tiptoed steps, as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone, except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen, as the smiling man crept toward me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me. Still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What the fuck do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What the fu? Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around, very slowly, and started dance-walking away. Just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go, until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off of the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk, he didn't look high, he looked completely and utterly insane. And that's a very, very scary thing to see.